With 2024 coming to an end, I thought I would take this opportunity to reflect on some of my favorite games this year. The games on this list are games that I played for the first time and are not limited to coming out this year. The games are obviously organized from my least favorite being 10, my most favorite being 1, but none of the games on this list are bad, and I would honestly recommend any of them if you have not tried them before. So, starting at number 10, we have Metaphor ReFantazio. As of making this video, I have not finished this game yet, and I believe I'm about halfway through, maybe even slightly past the halfway point. But from what I've played so far, I've enjoyed it quite a bit. The turn-based combat loop is fantastic, along with the many different archetypes you can choose from, and the music is stellar, which I feel like is almost expected coming from an Atlus game. I do think there's a bit too much dialogue between dungeons for my taste, but that could just me being picky, and maybe it's something I'll just need to adjust to in these kinds of games. I'm not against it, it just felt like I was reading a book instead of playing a game. Once I finish this, I want to try Persona, but I'm not really sure which one to start with. I was thinking of Persona 3 Reload, or maybe Persona 5. Let me know down in the comments below which one you think I should try first. Moving on to number 9, we have Path of Exile 2. PoE 2 has been an absolute blast since it launched in early access. There are currently 6 classes, each with 2 ascendancies, and I believe more will be added when the game is fully released. The beginning of the game can be a bit challenging since your character starts off kinda weak. The boss fights have a bit of a Souls-like feel to them, and if you're playing melee, it can even be more difficult as the melee classes struggle a bit more than the ranged ones in the early game. However, as you progress and your build starts to come together, the gameplay loop becomes highly addictive. The only other ARPG I've played is Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, and from what this game has to offer in its current state, it's definitely worth it. It's not perfect by any means, but for me, it's far better than Diablo 4, and Diablo 4 has been out for a year and a half. I'm excited to see how this game evolves once it's fully released with all classes, ascendancies, acts, endgame content, and seasonal updates. As I'm currently having a blast with the endgame right now, I do think once you get to a certain point, you're kind of just waiting for the full release, as there won't be really anywhere else for you to progress further into the game. At number 8, we have Yakuza 0. This was my first game in the Yakuza series, and boy was I in for a ride. Playing as Kazuma Kiryu and Goro Majima was an exhilarating experience, especially Majima's breakdance move, which was ridiculously overpowered. It was literally the only move you needed to use with him, as it could just take out multiple enemies at once, and it was also good for just beating up one single person. You would spin, knock them to the ground, and just keep kicking them and kicking them and kicking them. I think I underestimated how much there would be to do in this game beyond the main story. The sheer volume of side activities is honestly overwhelming, especially if you're someone who loves 100% in games. I did consider doing that at first for this game, but I decided not to, which I might change my mind later, but having to go, like 100 plus hours, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, depending on how experienced you are with either Yakuza games or just platinuming games in general. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of effort and time to play into this, and I enjoy playing many games, so we'll have to see on that one. You have the side stories, which can be quite goofy at times, some serious as well. You have many games like the bowling, pool, arcades, and a lot more. And probably everybody's favorite, most famous, Mahjong. Mahjong is fun, but frustrating, especially when it's your first time playing and you have no idea what's going on. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I fully understand what's going on at this point after playing Yakuza 0 for quite some time, with Mahjong being the most played minigame probably that I played, just trying to learn it. At number 7, we have Cult of the Lamb. Cult of the Lamb was my first introduction into the roguelike genre, and I wasn't expecting to have to farm resources for upgrades, but it turned out to be quite a pleasant surprise. Even when you weren't fighting and preparing for the next run, there was virtually no downtime, since you had to manage your camp by either feeding, healing up your people, cleaning up their golden poop, which I thought was crazy at first. There's even other kinds of poop that you can clean up, which give you different kinds of resources, or even sacrificing them for more XP. I thought the weapon variety was pretty good, thought there was a pretty good selection, but I found myself gravitating towards the faster attacking weapons over the slower, more powerful ones, as I felt like I would do a lot better with those than the big axe or something, the big hammer that you would get. Although I haven't finished the game, I can definitely see myself returning to it frequently throughout 2025 and even beyond that. I could even see them adding a DLC or a sequel, and honestly, I hope they do, as I think it would do pretty well, and it would definitely be something that I pick up and put a lot of time into. And number 6, we have Black Myth Wukong. This featured some of the best action combat that I experienced all year. It was a game where I didn't care much for the story pretty much at all. I honestly can't even really recall much of it except for the very beginning and the very end. But that doesn't take away from how much joy I got out of this game. While it did have some Souls-like elements, as many games tend to have these days, the combat was fluid and satisfying. The sheer number of boss fights was honestly pretty insane, and they even added a boss rush mode that I still need to try, which I do imagine would be a lot of fun. For me, the game wasn't really all that difficult except for maybe 2 or 3 boss fights, with the secret boss fight being the hardest in my opinion. I do think there could have been some more balance around some of the skills, specifically the large head ability where you headbutt the ground. This ability was overpowered throughout the entire game, and you get it pretty much at the very beginning of the game. I didn't feel the need to switch off it pretty much at all, and when I did, I definitely would go right back to it, as I just felt it was more useful than anything that I had tried after that. If you have not played this game yet, you should definitely give it a try, as I promise you, it is well worth the money. At number 5, we have Yakuza Like a Dragon, the 7th main entry in the Yakuza series. Although this is the 7th main entry in the Yakuza series, this was only my 3rd game in the series, and I was not expecting it to be turn-based. For some reason, I thought Infinite Wealth was the first turn-based game that they introduced in the Yakuza series. I haven't even played Infinite Wealth yet, but I just saw that there was some turn-based action in it, and I was like, well, maybe I'll wait, play Yakuza 7 first. Turned out Yakuza 7 had turn-based as well. With that being said, I enjoyed every single hour of this game, as I have over 90 hours into it. The class system, also known as jobs, is pretty well done. For the most part, any party member could really use any job, though they did have at least one where they would probably excel slightly more than they did in any of the other ones. This game has pretty much everything that I look for in a game today, which is a ton of content, from side quests to mini games, including a cheap version of Mario Kart, which was called Dragon Kart, which was honestly pretty fun. I spent hours at the batting cages as well, and after 2 hours of missing every ball that wasn't right down the middle or in that middle row of boxes, I realized the resolution I was playing in was causing me to miss. I had to drop the resolution from 4K to 1080p just to play the batting cages minigame. For some reason, playing in 4K, it would just cause my player to miss. I'm assuming this was just some design flaw in the game and bug that was just never addressed and probably never will be. So if you're looking to play in 4K, make sure you switch to 1080p when you do the batting cages. Aside from that, I honestly don't really have any complaints with this game, since I didn't bother to do the true final Millennium Tower, which I've heard is quite a grind, and it's not really all that hard. It just takes a lot to get your characters set up to be able to do. This was another game that had a lot of dialogue like Metaphor, but it didn't really bother me as much as Metaphor did. If you've ever thought about picking up Yakuza 7, I highly recommend it, since it is separate from the ones that come before it in terms of it being a fresh start in the story, so it's somewhere where you could start with this game and not have to worry about the things before. You might miss out on a little bit, but not too much to where it would take away from the core experience of the game. At number 4, we have Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. Now, I really didn't want to put this game on the list since it's technically not a new game, but it did kind of feel like one at times. If you've ever played Elden Ring and enjoyed it, you know why this is at number 4. You could even argue it to be number 1. From Software has always made challenging DLC, but this one was on another level. Radahn himself was honestly just on another level. It felt like facing Thanos with all the Infinity Stones, as he would just slap me around and there was literally nothing that I could do. Now, I did eventually beat him, and in my opinion, he was much more difficult than Malenia was. He's honestly the main reason why I have not done a second playthrough of the DLC, as I just really don't want to face him again, even after they nerfed him. I played through the whole DLC using the martial arts or hand-to-hand combat weapons for the most part. At times, this felt like a bit of a mistake, because I don't think the game was designed with that playstyle in mind, where you're so close up to them and just hitting them with combos pretty much. The freeze buildup was helpful, but I wouldn't recommend using these weapons on your first playthrough. I'm excited to see what From Software has in store for their next main Souls-like game, apart from Elden Ring Night Rain, and I honestly hope it is Sekiro 2. At number 3, we have Baldur's Gate 3. I'd been wanting to play this game for about a year now, and I finally got around to it earlier this month. I waited for a slight sale since I wasn't really sure if I'd enjoy the D&D aspect of this game, as it's not really an interest of mine. I like the concept of D&D, but I'm not really into playing it mainly in person. That being said, this game is easily one of my all-time favorites. It took me until the end of Act 2 to really understand how to play the game and understand most of the mechanics, but once I did, it became even more enjoyable. I went with a monk and loved the open fist combat. Getting up close to enemies and pummeling them until they exploded was pretty satisfying, even though I still don't know what caused that to happen. It just happened. My main party consisted of Astarion, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing right, Shadowheart, and Lae'zel, not sure how you pronounce that either. I did enjoy Shadowheart's side story the most out of all the characters, as I'm sure most players did. This game has probably the highest replayability factor of any game that I played this year in my opinion, and it definitely deserves bonus points for that. If you are hesitant to buy Baldur's Gate 3 because you're not a huge fan of D&D like I was, I promise you that this game is worth every single dollar, and you will get a lot of hours out of it. At number 2, we have Final Fantasy X. I played the HD remastered version of this game, and while the graphics are pretty dated in my opinion, the art style still holds up pretty well, and I was honestly impressed with how good the game looks given how long ago it was released. I never thought I would like turn-based games, but they have definitely become some of my favorite games to play. This is the 4th game on the list, but it was the first turn-based game I ever played. The way this game handled its turn-based combat was pretty unique. You could swap out a party member mid-fight, aside from certain story points where only specific characters could be used. And then you could see the turn order and how certain moves, abilities, and attacks could change the order on the fly, which was something I haven't seen in any other turn-based game that I've played so far. The story was top-notch, and although I don't think a remake is necessary, I do think it would be cool to get one with updated cinematics. If they do decide to remake this game, which I have heard rumors about, but I think right now they're just rumors, they should definitely keep the turn-based combat system. Given this is another JRPG on the list, it's safe to say that I am definitely ready for more of them. Finally, at number 1, we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Is there really anything else to say other than masterpiece? From the story to the combat, side quests, minigames, the Colosseum fights, the amazing soundtrack, literally everything about this game completely blew me away. Queen's Blood is by far the best minigame this game has to offer. I've always enjoyed Gwent in The Witcher 3, so whenever I saw a new Queen's Blood match, I dropped everything I was doing to face my next opponent right away. The only downside I have to mention about this game, even though I did call it a masterpiece, is that if you're aiming for the Platinum Trophy, the Colosseum fights can be pretty brutal. There are quite a few challenges in the Colosseum fights that are going to require you to try them many times, as they leave absolutely no room for error. I found myself making one small mistake that would just mess up the entire run, and I would go from being on fight 8 or 9, even 10 out of 10, and then just having to restart back at 1 because all my characters died, or I just didn't have enough mana or anything to keep going. I did have fun doing them, but I was so relieved once they were finished and then I didn't have to do them anymore, and I could just start my game on hard mode, which was the last thing I needed to do to get the Platinum Trophy. I believe I have somewhere between like 120 and 140 hours into this game, and most of that is going for the Platinum Trophy and doing those Colosseum fights. I'm new to the Final Fantasy franchise as a whole, and I didn't know anything about the original Final Fantasy VII story until after I beat this game. For the most part, I think the story has stayed the same, at least the core story, though there are definitely some added elements with side characters getting more backstory, which I really don't mind at all, and I think it works pretty well. I was once the biggest Final Fantasy hater, like the biggest Final Fantasy hater, and now I'm one of the biggest Final Fantasy lovers, especially Final Fantasy VII. Aside from GTA 6, the Final Fantasy Part 3, whatever it is going to be called, is my most anticipated game, which probably isn't going to come out for some years, but I'm curious to see how they wrap up this whole remake trilogy. I may know most of what's going to happen since I'm sure they're going to keep the ending of the game as close to the original as they can. Again, at least the core story of it. But after the ending of Rebirth, as many other people do, I have a lot of questions and I'm itching to get them answered. This year has been about moving away from toxic competitive multiplayer games. I used to only play pretty much COD. Like I would dabble with some single player games here and there, but majority of the time it was just COD. I do play League of Legends still here and there, which I am trying to move away from that too, because if any of you guys have played that, you know how toxic League of Legends can be. The last couple of years though, I've been shifting more towards enjoying other types of games and trying new things like the JRPGs and the turn-based games, which I've honestly come to love, and they're definitely some of my favorite games and genres of all time. I really never thought I would enjoy these games at all. Like I mentioned before, I went from being the biggest Final Fantasy hater to placing it literally at the top of my list, specifically Final Fantasy VII and the remake trilogy. I encourage any of you who is watching this video, especially if you only play multiplayer games or primarily play games like COD, 2K, whatever it may be, to try branching out and explore other types of games in 2025. You might just find your next favorite game or even realize that there is so much more out there than the same old rinse and repeat games year after year that games like COD offer. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe. Leave a comment below on what your favorite game of the year was or what your favorite game is from this list. And I will catch y'all in the next video, y'all. Peace.